In part 3 of our recap, we covered the events of Resident Evil 2, talking about Leon and Claire's misadventures in Raccoon City. In part 4, we'll be recapping the events shown in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Though Resident Evil 3 Nemesis is a sequel to Resident Evil 2 in technical terms, as far as the chronology of its events is concerned, it's more of a side mission in that a section of its story takes place a day before Resident Evil 2's events, and another section a couple of days after them. While the first 2 Resident Evil games released would both offer players the choice to play as one of 2 protagonists, Resident Evil 3 was instead a one-woman show, with STARS member Jill Valentine, who is one of the 2 protagonists of RE1, taking center stage. As Resident Evil 3 begins, Raccoon City is caught in the grips of the outbreak, with every corner of the city teeming with zombified monstrosities. Under such dire circumstances, Jill realizes that her only chance at survival is to escape the city altogether. She sets out for the RPD, making her way across the streets of the city while fighting off or avoiding the zombies that lie in her path. On her way to the police station, she comes across someone you might remember, fellow STARS officer Brad Vickers, the chopper pilot, who, as you might remember at the beginning of the first game, flew away in panic, leaving his fellow STARS members stranded in the Arklay Mountains. As Jill and Brad make their way to the RPD, right outside the police station's gates, they're stopped by something immensely terrifying. If you thought Mr. X was a monstrosity, wait till you get a load of this guy. Nemesis is, on paper, also a tyrant, but it's far more terrifying than any other tyrant bioweapon Umbrella has ever cooked up. Vastly more intelligent than any other BOW, with far superior strength and dexterity, Nemesis is more than just a formidable foe. And what's its purpose? It's an experimental weapon designed by Umbrella, of course, with its mission being to track down and kill all members of the RPD STARS unit who were witnesses to Umbrella's devious shenanigans. And as soon as it makes its appearance, Nemesis gets to work on its mission. With a single brutal blow, it impales Brad with a massive spike appendage, killing him swiftly but painfully. Completely taken aback and rightly scared out of her wits, Jill makes a run for it and enters the RPD, though the game does give the player a choice to fight Nemesis there and then. But really, who in their right minds would want to do that? The police station, as we already know from the events of Resident Evil 2, is in a sorry state, with little to no survivors left, and its hallways crawling with zombies. Constantly being pursued by Nemesis through the RPD, Jill equips herself with some requisite weaponry, and then, in the STARS office, hears a transmission on the radio coming from a man named Carlos who's requesting for backup. With Nemesis still in pursuit, who's also equipped with a rocket launcher, did we fail to mention that? Jill flees from the station. Back out in the streets of Raccoon City, Jill makes her way forward while fighting for her life, coming across everything from regular old human zombies to vicious zombified dogs. Eventually, Jill runs into Carlos, the man who'd been on the radio, and finds out just who he is. Carlos tells Jill that he's a member of the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service, or the USBC, who had deployed a squad of soldiers to Raccoon City to, allegedly, help rescue the city's denizens. Yeah, sure, okay, Umbrella, whatever you say. But Jill is no naive fool. She's been through the grinder, she's seen what Umbrella has been up to for all these years, and she knows that they have ulterior motives in everything they do. Obviously then, she doesn't trust Carlos. But Carlos, on the other hand, says he's nothing more than a mercenary who's being paid to do a job, and that he neither knows nor cares about what Umbrella actually is. Given the fact that she's caught in the middle of a city teeming with zombies, not to mention the fact that Nemesis is still chasing her and doing everything in its power, and it has a lot of power, to see her dead, Jill doesn't really have much of a choice. She may not trust Carlos, but she knows that for now, she at least has to work with him. So it is then that the two of them together make their way to a tram car, where Jill meets the rest of Carlos's squad, comprised of Nikolai Zinoviev and their squad leader Mikhail Victor, who is already injured quite badly when Jill meets him. Tensions brew once again between Jill and Nikolai, neither of whom trust each other, but Carlos soon steps in and vouches for Jill. Begrudgingly, Nikolai tells her that they have a way out of the city. If they can make it to the Raccoon City clock tower and then ring the tower's bell, they'll be able to signal an extraction chopper to fly in. Conveniently enough, there's also a landing zone right in that very area, making it an ideal escape route. But there's a catch, of course. The only safe way to get to the clock tower is by getting there via the tram car they're currently standing in, but the tram car isn't working, and they need to gather up some parts to get it to operate again. Jill, Carlos, and Nikolai set out to gather parts they need from across the city, but their trek proves to be very eventful. For starters, Nikolai gets caught in an explosion caused under strange circumstances, and Jill presumes him to be dead. Following that, while Jill is gathering more of the parts she needs, she's set upon by Nemesis, who seems to have a weird knack for tracking her down. As she runs from the monstrosity, the ground gives way beneath her feet, and she crashes into an underground tunnel, where she still catches no respite. She's attacked by a giant mutated millipede, completely transformed by large doses of the T-virus, and dubbed the Gravedigger. Jill manages to escape, and finally manages to make her way back to the tram with all the required parts. Sure enough, the tram gets moving again, with Jill, Carlos, and the injured Mikhail on board, but it doesn't take long for things to go wrong again. No points for guessing how though. Yep, Nemesis breaks into the tram. Heroically, Mikhail makes his stand against Nemesis, fighting against the BOW. But obviously the injured soldier is no match for him and is easily swept aside with a crushing blow. Refusing to go down easily, Mikhail sacrifices himself with a grenade, blowing Nemesis right out of the tram with the resulting explosion, but not killing him of course, and sending the tram crashing into the clock tower. Well, at least they reach their destination, right? Miraculously still alive, Jill and Carlos make their way up to the top of the clock tower, with Nemesis still in pursuit. They're able to reach the top safely though, where Jill rings the tower's bell, and sure enough, the extraction chopper is soon spotted flying in their direction. But of course, things are not going to be so easy. Remember Nemesis's rocket launcher? It pulls it out and fires a rocket straight at the chopper, which is caught in a devastating explosion and is completely destroyed. With the chopper destroyed, Nemesis then moves on to Jill, his actual target. Well, one of them anyway. Jill confronts the monster, but though she attempts to fight it off, she's quickly overwhelmed. Nemesis stabs her with its tentacle, and though she manages to stun it bad enough to make it collapse temporarily, she incurs heavy damage as well. As she gets stabbed by Nemesis's tentacle, she's infected with the T-virus and falls unconscious herself. She's found by Carlos, who grabs her unconscious body and takes her to safety. At this point in Resident Evil 3, we jump ahead a couple of days later, with Jill still unconscious and infected with the virus, and Carlos watching over her. In an attempt to save Jill's life, Carlos makes his way into the Raccoon City General Hospital, which it turns out has also been an Umbrella-funded front for the pharmaceutical company's experiments. Thankfully though, that funding also means that resting inside the hospital is a vaccine for the virus. While in the hospital though, Carlos makes some startling revelations. He comes across another mercenary who's visibly injured thanks to a gunshot wound. That gunshot wound, the mercenary claims, was given to him by Nikolai, who, as it turns out, had faked his death and is clearly up to no good. Though the mercenary dies immediately afterward thanks to an explosive booby trap, Carlos realizes that things with Nikolai might not be what they seem to be. Right now, however, Carlos has to press on with the task at hand. After many trials and tribulations, Carlos manages to get his hands on some of the cure, and though the hospital itself is completely destroyed due to a string of unfortunate events, also destroying all the remaining vaccine alongside it, Carlos is able to make his way back to Jill, inject her with the vaccine in his position, and restore her back to health. As soon as Jill regains consciousness, Carlos tells her that Nikolai is still alive. He tells her that there's something he needs to take care of, before telling her that he'll meet back up with her later, and then setting off on his own. But you can probably guess what happens next. It doesn't take long for Jill to be ambushed by Nemesis, who's much more mutated now, and as such, more powerful and durable yet again. She manages to make her escape and finds herself cutting through the Raccoon Park, where things begin to come to a head. Here, Jill encounters Nikolai, who reveals the full extent of his plans. Sent in as part of a group called the Supervisors, Nikolai's mission was to observe the combat effects of all the infected in Raccoon City, as well as BOWs sent into the city by Umbrella. As Nikolai is revealing what his true plans were, the ground begins to shake. Nikolai, who knows what the tremors mean, flees, while the ground once again caves in beneath Jill's feet. You can probably guess what happens next. Jill is confronted by the giant mutated millipede, the one known as Gravedigger. Jill engages the monster in a fight and is able to kill it by electrocuting it. Soon, Jill meets Carlos again, who explains some vital things. For starters, it's revealed that the US government is planning on launching a nuke on Raccoon City to eradicate any traces of the virus and stop the infection from spreading further, and they're doing it very soon, which means that Jill and Carlos don't have long to escape. Thankfully, Carlos also tells Jill that he knows of a chopper in the vicinity, which they can use to make their escape. The conclusion of Resident Evil 3 is a harrowing one, which sees Jill squaring off against not only Nikolai, but also Nemesis, who has continued to mutate and transform into an even deadlier form. There are multiple ways things can turn out in the game's ending, but one way or another, Jill manages to stop or kill Nikolai, while also managing to finally kill Nemesis and put an end to his incessant terrors. Using either the chopper Carlos told her about, or being helped by fellow STARS member Barry Burton, who arrives on the scene with a different chopper, Jill and Carlos are able to escape. While they do so, a nuclear missile strikes Raccoon City, completely vaporizing the city and destroying everything inside of it, which of course also includes any evidence of Umbrella's wrongdoings. And just as Leon and Claire had done at the end of Resident Evil 2, just as Chris had decided to do before going off to Europe, Jill vows to do whatever it takes to dismantle Umbrella and bring the organization down. That's it for Part 4. When we return for Part 5, we'll be moving out of Raccoon City and going straight into the events of Resident Evil Code Veronica. And that wraps it up. If you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing to our channel. We upload new videos daily, so make sure you don't miss them by subscribing. We appreciate your support and we thank you for checking us out.